founder of DLA Ignite. I'm with Albert today, and we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. And well, the title is How the UK Public Sector is Deploying AI Under the Radar. Albert, welcome.
Thank you.
Let everybody know where they can find you.
So I'm Albert. I'm a professor of economic law at the University of Bristol Law School, and I've been thinking about these things long and hard while I was trying to write this book. I don't expect people to read the book, but I'll give you some snippets today, see if they find it interesting.
So, where could we find the book? If
So
we
the book is published by Oxford University Press, but it should be available on ebook in your preferred
Okay, and it's
platform.
called.
It's called Digital Technologies and Public Procurement.
Okay, fine. So, you're involved in. So tell us about your involvement in AI and the public sector.
So basically, I have been researching procurement for the last 15 years or so, and there's always been talk of digitalization, how to do electronic procurement, and then quite naturally, as more advanced data and AI technologies have emerged, then everybody's quite excited. If we were talking about this in 2018, everything would be about how to do procurement on a blockchain.
Yes.
Um, and now it's all about how do we use ChatGPT so we don't need to write these lengthy reports. Oh wait, the tenders will also use ChatGPT. How do we protect ourselves against the use of AI by tenders? So it's a very fast-moving area, but I'm interested in it fundamentally from the perspective of how using AI by the public sector affects us all, and mainly in ways that we cannot see or anticipate.
So I mean, I've written tender documents in the past, and I must admit it would be I look at ChatGPT and think, cool, that could save me some time.
Yeah, it could save time, and I think there's some scope for that. But I think the problem is also that you need to check very, very carefully what it says. It's going to be very hard for ChatGPT to get to know who Tim is, what experience does he have, what exactly can he do, how not to overpromise, how to be distinct from other people. So like everything, it's about how it's used. It's not about the use of the solution itself.
And
And
I guess I think sometimes we forget, don't we? I see a lot of um, hype on LinkedIn about how AI is going to change sales, but ultimately, sales is a human to human, and procurement is a human to human thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's to some extent. I think it also depends what is it you're trying to sell. So maybe you could automate the sale of things that are fully specified and fully standardized. Maybe AI could buy pens, but I don't think it could buy services. I don't think it could um, change the way things are done, and more innovation in service delivery, even in supply contracts is important. So I think it's there are some low level hanging fruits of automation that AI could help with, but those are for non value added tasks. I don't think AI can or will in our lifetimes do anything that is value added.
So what's the inspiration behind the book?
So the inspiration behind the book is basically that most governments, and in particular the UK government, takes a wait and see approach to AI. So they
Mm.
see what's happening in the market. They're not quite sure how to regulate it. They are aware there are some risks, but they don't want to intervene too quickly because then they fear that they're going to disadvantage AI companies in the UK, especially after Brexit and with Sunak's premiership. AI is seen as the boon to our economic growth and renovation of public services. So basically, there's no rules fundamentally on what these things are or how they should be used. But at the same time, the public sector wants to buy them, which means that the public buyers that need to go to the market need to try to understand them themselves and need to create in those contracts safeguards against excessive uses or problematic uses of this technology. And I think it's just not happening. We keep seeing reports about how the police or the home office deploy facial surveillance without telling anybody. We see automation, for example, of benefit management, and I'm really worried about what could happen with the latest transition into universal credit when most things may be automated and done by AI. We may receive fines in our homes just because the AI thought it recognized our car,
Mm.
right? Because we're doing lots of image processing through AI and things like that. And it's just happening without us knowing. The government is not publishing reports, it's not giving us any details, even if they recognize that they should. They have created an algorithmic transparency standard that they have labeled as world leading. It's been in place since late 2021. And last time I checked last week, it had been used by 7 organizations. I struggle to believe there's 7 uses of AI in the UK. Actually, the Public Law Project, which is quite concerned about the use, particularly in migration and other settings with vulnerable people, they have created their own register through freedom of information requests and very complicated ways of trying to extract information from the government. And they have identified almost 50 uses already. So at least it's 10 times more. And I'm sure this is a drop in the ocean. And to be frank, I'm worried because these are technologies that create data streams and analysis and predictions about all of us that we don't know how they are being used now or how they can be used in the future. And without meaningful oversight, this is problematic. So I think that the main argument I try to push in the book is that we need a new authority for this. We need to create an independent body that is tasked with looking at how the public sector is buying these technologies, how it's deploying them, and importantly, it should be authorizing it before it happens. Because I think with AI, we're in a situation where it's going to be very hard to undo any system change once the horse has bolted. And I'm not sure if it's bolted already, but I think it's going to bolt soon.
Yes. So what you're kind of asking for is like if you think about qualifications, in qualifications, we've got the officer qualification, which we call Ofqual. So that sort of thing, and then and for communications, we've got Ofcom. So is that the sort of thing that you're kind of suggesting?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. In some ways, it's, for example, similar to the Information Commissioner Officer for data protection. There's also the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So there are some bodies that exist, but they don't have the right powers, and certainly they don't have the right volume of resource and staffing. I think it's very worrying that the National Audit Office published a report last year saying 70% of data and data science vacancies in the public sector are unfulfilled, and about 1 in 2 of the recruitment processes just don't manage to appoint anybody.
Hmm.
I think this is a crisis brewing because we have a very underskilled and sort of outgunned public sector going to negotiate with private providers. And I think we will soon face massive dependency. This will also not surprise anybody that works in the public sector because the public sector really works on Amazon Web Services for cloud and on Microsoft licenses for all the other solutions. So we are just going to replicate the same situation in AI, but it's a bit silly we do that because we've experienced the problems of vendor lock-in, concentration of vendors in other sectors, and we just sort of a bit asleep at the wheel, letting it happen.
So in terms of the things that we see in the media, we saw recently that the UK and the US signed something, though nobody seemed to know what it was. There was also that meeting that Rishi Sunak organised in Milton Keynes at the place I can't remember, the
Yeah,
code cracking place,
Bletchley Park.
Bletchley, and the European Union are now have a policy in terms of they're trying to create some sort of legislation. What's your view on all of that? That sort of that melting
Yeah.
pot.
So like most things, it's complicated. And I think the UK's position is particularly difficult after Brexit because it sort of wants to chart its own way. It wants to approximate to the US, but at the same time, it's going to be very hard to deviate from the EU, which is basically setting the global standard. And the US is also taking things much more seriously recently. So I think November was a bit of a good example. So there was all this anticipation about this international conference. There would be this declaration being signed about recognizing risks of AI and recognizing we need to do something about it. And the day before, the US passed an executive order where basically it set out policies that were much more ambitious, much more detailed than what the declaration would ever force them to do. Um, so I think it's difficult to see where the UK is going to go, but my impression is that it's very hard to address these issues on the basis of law. So if you look at what the European Union has done, they have just passed the AI Act, which is going to be a regulation applicable in the 27 member states. And the tricky thing is that when it comes to the public sector, it will create lots of requirements about how to audit, how to pre-test, how to record keep, and quality assure all these systems, but only where these systems are used in what's called high-risk uses.
Right.
And and these high-risk uses are not very tightly defined. And also, as a result of the legislative process, there is a way to exempt them. So, for example, if the Department for Pensions wants to automate the payment of pensions. That is high risk because, of course, people may be out of pocket and face hardship if this fails. So if they use AI, in principle, they need to comply with all of these requirements. But if they can say, oh, it's merely an administrative task, then they don't need to. And we're going to have lots of legal fights about what these things mean. So it's going to be difficult to implement. And also, I think it's also very important to recognize that all of this very complicated regulatory architecture in the end says, well, in terms of cybersecurity, go to whatever standards industry has set. In terms of record keeping, in terms of integrity, go to the industry standards. So in the end, we create a very complicated regulation that doesn't do a lot more than enforce what industry decides to do. And we already see that the industry is not particularly good at self-policing. They are not committing to very high levels of concern, and we're seeing it these days. We have all of these worries about, for example, disinformation, and we know that large language models are making the risk of disinformation in elections extremely high. There were pieces in the main news, for example, in Channel 4 yesterday about this, and yet all of them are in a race to release publicly the next model. We saw yesterday an improvement by ChatGPT. The other ones are announced for the next few weeks. So nobody's thinking about the ethics and the implications of this because they are in their own race and they are sort of blinded by the technology. So I think what we need is to take a step back and say, if this was about any other thing that we find dangerous, if this was about nuclear proliferation, if this was about medicines, we would not be letting the market go rife and then see what happens, or impose measures that in the end are in the control of the market. We just want to take a very clear view and probably quite a precautionary one. This is not happening in AI because technology sort of blinds us and we tend to only see the benefits. So I think that's a big concern. The other concern is about the sustainability of all of these changes, right? So there's also news in the media today about how the Amazon completely automated self-checkout store that they want to open in different places actually rely on lots of work just by people you don't see on the store, but people that are doing work remotely, right?
It was actually a call center, yes.
Yeah. So this is the other thing that I think there's lots of hype. So it could be that some of the things that are being done are not as dangerous as they look, because in the end they also rely on people doing specific things. But it's very hard to understand, and I think we need to slow down and not be scared of saying that. Especially government should not be scared to say this is a massive technical and social shift. It's going to change our structures and economy forever. We need to take time. We cannot let these companies burn money, burn the planet in the process, because developing this is very, very bad for the environment because it uses very high energy, and then see where we land in 2030. I think that's not the right approach.
Yes, I mean, if you look at the European regulations, they kind of seem a bit like GDPR to me, which is GDPR is probably the biggest, is the gold standard of the UK, but they still backed out of a whole bunch of things before they went live. For example, it doesn't apply to business emails, for example, so you can still get spammed from business emails because it, you know, and I just there was just so many areas where they didn't, they said we're going to produce this, and then actually they produced something a bit smaller.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good example. But there are other examples. For example, like the Online Safety Act, right, which the government is really pushing, and they say, oh, the Online Safety Act will, for example, protect our children and adolescents from bullying and from it won't, because the problem with that is that even if you create quite a stringent legal rule, the application is going to be very difficult. So if you have one teenager creating synthetic videos, about colleagues in school and putting them on TikTok, this is very, very hard to prevent. So,
Yeah.
so you can sanction it later, but it's going to keep happening. And I think here we need to think about things that we don't want to happen, and then we just need to create bans that basically mean we need to ban the technology.
So
There's no other way.
so in a way, that's the way we should be going forward, is working out scenarios saying we don't want this to happen, and then working back from that.
I think that's clearly the case. And going back to what worries me in the administration and the use of the public sector, I think one of the risks that we have now is that the public sector is going to start to work in ways that nobody understands. So, for example, imagine HMRC wants to implement a fraud detection AI that comes to say, oh, Albert probably defrauded in his taxes last year. But then when you ask the algorithm why, there's no explanation that a human can understand. So I cannot challenge it. HMRC doesn't really know what to do with information because they don't know what to look into. And we're going to be in this sort of Kafkaesque world where there's an AI implementation that nobody understands, nobody can challenge, nobody can change. And so clearly we don't want that. So clearly we should say somewhere, and I think that somewhere is in legislation, this should not be happening, right? And we should entrust a specific body with making sure it just doesn't happen.
So then we're then into the Minority Report type scenario, aren't we?
Yep.
With the film, which is where they went around and arrested people because they thought they might be thinking of doing a crime.
Yep.
So so that there could be an AI that says, "I think that Albert is not paying his taxes. Go and arrest him."
Yep. Yeah, and I think what we need to bear in mind is that our legal system is not ready for that. Because until now, if a tax inspector sort of suspected me, they had to discharge a high burden of proof because they could come and arrest me or charge me with it. I think with AI, we tend to just trust it gets it right.
Yes.
And even when there's a human looking at those recommendations, we have seen it with judges and with policemen. There's lots of reports that say we tend to trust too much the AI quite uncritically. We tend to think that the data it uses is infallible, whereas in most cases, the data is just whatever's happened socially until
It's
now. And
just clever programming.
yeah, and there are some very disgraceful and worrying cases. For example, in the Netherlands, they developed a fraud detection risk system that basically it turned out if you were non-Dutch, if you were non-white, if you were not in a two-parental family, you were hundreds of times more likely to be flagged as defrauding in your benefits. And what was worrying in that case, but it's also the Robodebt case in Australia, is that the consequences of that were automated. So the moment that you were flagged, your banks were notified, your landlord was notified, your employer was notified, you were issued fixed penalty notices immediately, and this put lots of people in very, very difficult
I
situations
can
that,
imagine.
children were taken away from their parents, people committed suicide. And so we've seen this happen. We have the Australian and Dutch examples that are very clear. And these are jurisdictions that usually the UK wants to compare itself to. And yet we are not learning from that. We are sort of behind their footsteps going to the same to the same place. And I find that quite worrying.
So, I mean, we're because of the number of elections. I think there's 47 elections that we've got this year.
Yep.
We've got, there's India, there's the UK, the US.
Yep.
We've had the Russian election. There's going to be a lot of misinformation around, and the ability to create that is got even greater. So we're moving. The AI is actually moving us to a zero trust environment. We cannot trust anything.
Yeah.
We cannot trust the news. We can, and so that's kind of that's the flip side against the benefits of what we're going to have with AI.
That's one way to look at it, but I think that the other way is not so much that we're moving to zero trust, but that we end up trusting everything.
Right.
And I don't know which one is more dangerous, because if everybody were to be extremely skeptical about the information they're given and very inquisitive about checking it, that could be a good thing.
Yes.
But I think the problem is that most of us are not in that bandwidth. Yeah, we're just scrolling through TikTok and look at what he said, look at what she said, and we are just not looking at it. And I think that's what's really problematic about the misinformation. It's not so much that people don't engage with it; it's that people engage too much with it. And I think that the more there is, the more it's likely it's going to happen. And again, yesterday in the news there was also a behavioral scientist saying that there's things you can do. So, for example, they are developing a game that you could play every day. Just 6 questions that ask you, is this real or false? And because it forces you to do that, then you're more likely to keep doing it during the day. So they're trying to promote that sort of critical engagement as a way out of the problem. But I just don't know how many people would do that in a sustained way, and how much we can train ourselves to have this sort of media literacy, so to speak, or sort of this critical approach to
I
things.
think it's very hard. My
Yeah.
87-year-old mother said to me, what email should I trust? And I said, you can't trust anything.
Yeah, you cannot trust the fact that it's an email. Yeah, that's a
Yes.
better starting point.
And I've had a cybersecurity expert on here who said, you do not click on any links at all. And then, of course, there's the the Phoenix product, which actually you don't need to click on a link. It has a 0-click or whatever it is called. All it needs to do is put a picture on your phone, and you're hacked.
Yep. And again, that's also a very big concern when it comes to the public sector. That's why, for example, TikTok cannot be used in government devices, because they worry that these sort of attacks can come through that app, and then you have access to all of the public information. So I think it also, all of these things are quite embedded. It's not only a problem for citizens, it's also a problem for the institutions that are meant to protect us. And so to me, it's a bit mad that we are not taking much more decisive steps to protect ourselves against that. And that's what I would keep inviting people to talk about.
Albert, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's a fascinating subject and something that's very, very fast moving. I see yet another, every day I seem to see something that this new AI development. It's not like every year or every 2 years or something. It's like every day.
Yeah, it might have happened while we speak. So
yeah. So remind people about your book.
So yeah, again, so my book is Digital Technologies and Public Procurement by Oxford University Press, and it's an academic book, but it has, I think, quite a good basis for people interested in this to get into the debates.
And where can people find you?
So they can find me at the University of Bristol Law School, or more easily just on LinkedIn or on Twitter. If you look for my name, it's quite distinctive, so I think you'll come across me.
Albert, thank you so much for coming on and talk about this. It's been fascinating.